Hi there. In this video we're going to discuss reflexive pronouns in Spanish. Let's dive right in. Reflexive pronouns are used when the subject and the object of the action is the same. As we discussed, the subject is the one who does the action, while the object is the one who receives the action. Therefore, if I do the action, then I receive the action as well. Now, let's go through them. Me, te, say, nos, os, say. Now, let's introduce some reflexive verbs to use in our sentences. Let's read them. Bañarse, meaning to bathe oneself. Cepillarse, meaning to brush oneself. Cortarse, meaning to cut oneself. Divertirse, meaning to enjoy oneself. Lavarse, meaning to wash oneself. Llamarse, meaning to call oneself. Mirarse, meaning to look at oneself. Peinarse, meaning to comb oneself. Vestirse, meaning to dress oneself. Now, let's use our reflexive verbs in sentences. Let's start with llamarse, which means to call oneself. If you remember in our lesson titled, Common Phrases in Spanish, we encountered the phrase me llamo Alliah, which means my name is Alliah. Here, we use the reflexive verb to introduce a name, and the literal translation is I call myself Alliah. In this case, I am both the subject and the object. I performed the action of calling, and I received the action of being called. Let's study the verb, llamarse. Llamarse is a type of reflexive verb, and most verbs that end with se are reflexive. If we remove the se, we get llamar, which is a type of ar verb. Now, let's recall how to conjugate ar verbs. As we discussed, we remove the ar ending and add different endings according to the subject. For I call, our formula would be llamar minus ar equals llam, then plus o equals llamo. Therefore, we have llamo, which means I call. Now, to make it reflexive, we add myself, which translates to me. Now, let's recall how we place object pronouns. As we discussed, we place them before the verb. For I call myself, our word order would be, myself I call. Therefore, we have me llamo, which means I call myself. Now, let's conjugate llamarse with all subjects. Let's read them. Me llamo, which means I call myself, or my name is. Te llamas, which means you call yourself, or your name is. Se llama, which can mean he calls himself, or his name is. She calls herself, or her name is. Or you call yourself, or your name is. Nos llamamos, which means we call ourselves, or our names are. Os llamáis, which means you call yourselves, or your names are. Se llaman, which can mean they call themselves, or their names are. Or you call yourselves, or your names are. Now, let's use the rest of our reflexive verbs in sentences. Let's use first-person singular as our subject and object. Let's read them. Number 1. Me baño todos los días, which means I bathe myself every day. Number 2. Me cepillo los dientes, which means I brush my teeth. Number 3. Me corto el dedo, which means I cut my finger, accidentally. Number 4. Me divierto en la fiesta, which means I enjoy myself at the party. Number 5. Me lavo la cara, which means I wash my face. Number 6. Me miro en el espejo, which means I look at myself in the mirror. Number 7. Me peino el pelo, which means I comb my hair. Now, as you can see, I highlighted some words and noticed that instead of using the possessive pronouns, in Spanish, we simply use the articles, el, la, and las. This is because in reflexive verbs, the reflexive pronouns already indicate who received the action, so it's not necessary to use possessive pronouns. Now, let's move on to opposite verbs that end with se. Although some of them are not reflexive, I group them together because they are somehow related to each other. Let's go through them. Number 1. Dormirse versus despertarse. For dormirse, which means to fall asleep, we have me duermo porque hace frío, which means I fall asleep because it's cold. For despertarse, which means to wake up, we have me despierto porque hace calor, which means I wake up because it's hot. Number 2. Acostarse versus levantarse. For acostarse, which means to go to bed, or to lie down, we have me acuesto tarde todas las noches, which means I go to bed late every night. For levantarse, which means to get up, or to stand up, we have me levanto temprano todas las mañanas, which means I get up early every morning. Next. Number 3. Ponerse versus quitarse. For ponerse, which means to put on, we have me pongo el vestido, which means I put on my dress. For quitarse, which means to take off, we have me quito el vestido, which means I take off my dress. Number 4. Irse versus quedarse. For irse, which means to leave, or to go away, we have me voy, which means I'm leaving. For quedarse, which means to stay, or to remain, we have me quedo, which means I'm staying. And that's it for this video. I hope this video helps you understand the usage of reflexive pronouns in Spanish. Stay tuned for more language learning videos. Bye for now.